Hello, everybody. How are you doing this fine Saturday afternoon? We are now less than 4 days away from the start of NFL free agency. In less than 4 days, we can start getting an idea of what this team is thinking, what this team is prioritizing, and what kind of team we might have in 2021. Less than 4 days away from an explosion of NFL happenings after a real dead period after the Super Bowl. So, I want to take this video to talk about some of the major discussion points around the Seattle Seahawks in recent weeks, specifically dealing with Russell Wilson and his contract, because I see a lot of different things being said about Wilson, the contract that he has, and the salary cap situation of this team, much of which is dictated by his contract. And basically, I want to go ahead and put the facts out there. I want to dispel some myths. There are, I think, 3 myths going on right now about Russell Wilson, his contract, and the salary cap situation of the Seattle Seahawks. And I want to take this video to talk about those myths and explain why they are just that, myths, because the reality is quite different from what I'm seeing as the public perception. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our first myth. Myth number 1. The Seattle Seahawks are not restructuring Russell Wilson's contract because Russell Wilson doesn't want to restructure his contract. That is to say that it is Russell Wilson's decision on whether or not his contract gets restructured. This myth is false. This article by Greg Bell, which was posted yesterday afternoon, goes into some detail on this, but the overall headline to take away from this article is the Seahawks don't even need Russell Wilson's approval to restructure his deal for more cap space. And if you scroll down through the article a little bit, you can get to some specifics about this. The team doesn't have to wait for his approval to do it. The News Tribune has confirmed from league sources with knowledge of the deals that the last 2 contract extensions Wilson signed to remain in Seattle, including his current one that made him the richest player in NFL history in April 2019, were done with a provision that allows the Seahawks to restructure Wilson's contract without his explicit or first approval. The deal's language allows the team to convert some of Wilson's base salary into bonus money for the purposes of salary cap savings without the QB first saying okay. Now, I don't know if it would be a great idea to just do it without telling him. He is, after all, your star quarterback and face of the franchise and all that. But the team could do that if they wanted to. The team could simply move some of Wilson's money into signing bonus and take it off the cap hit for this year without him even giving his approval or even telling him at all. So if the Seahawks do not restructure Russell Wilson's contract, it is not because Wilson doesn't want to. It is because they don't want to. And as for why they might not want to, that's going to be what I kind of get into next. And that is myth number 2. If Russell Wilson restructures his contract, he will be taking less money, or if you want to put it like this, a pay cut. If Russell Wilson takes this restructuring, he will be getting less money. This myth is also false. And now you can scroll further down this article. You can go down a little bit more. And it doesn't specifically address this rumor, but if you read what is being put on screen here, it does talk about how NFL contracts work. I'm going to go ahead and boil it down to its simplest form for the sake of this video. If you want to read more about it, you can go read what I put on screen. You can go read this whole article. You can read other articles about it. However, if Wilson restructures his contract to convert his base salary this year into a signing bonus to remove the cap hit, he's not taking less money. He's actually taking more money because more of his salary over the course of his contract will become guaranteed, meaning the Seahawks, if anything, are going to have to pay him more because it will be harder for them to cut him. Right now, if the Seahawks were to cut or trade Russell Wilson, they would take a dead cap hit of $39 million. If they do it next offseason, that number drops to $26 million. And if they do it the following offseason, it would be $13 million. It goes down by $13 million with each successive offseason. If you restructure his contract, those numbers in future off seasons go up. The amount of money that you take as dead cap space in future off seasons actually goes up, meaning that is a deterrent for the Seahawks to move on from Wilson in future years. So if anything, in a couple years, the Seahawks might get it in their heads that, hey, we want to cut Wilson and take the $13 million dead cap hit and just move on. And that's something that teams do sometimes. That is something that is manageable. Teams cut players and take on big cap hits like that pretty frequently. They don't often take $39 million cap hits, but they might take a $13 million cap hit to get rid of an aging quarterback who isn't very good anymore. But if you restructure him, that $13 million might be $25 million, and then the team might feel differently about whether or not they want to cut that player. So restructuring Wilson's deal doesn't mean he gets paid less. It means that he gets paid more later. And unless Russell Wilson is in a lot of debt, like he took on a loan from the Mafia and bet all his money on the Chiefs in the Super Bowl or something like that, he doesn't need the money right now. I understand he wants to get as much money as he can, and I don't really have a problem with that. But he doesn't need that money right this minute. He needs the money after he retires because he wants to go do all this weird, crazy stuff. So there's really no reason why Wilson wouldn't want to restructure if the opportunity was lended to him. So the overall point I'm trying to get to here is that the person who is stopping the Seahawks from restructuring with Russell Wilson is probably not Russell Wilson. There's no reason for him to not want to restructure. The person who might be preventing the Seahawks from restructuring with Wilson is probably John Schneider, maybe Pete Carroll. I think that you can make a much stronger argument that those two guys want to keep their options open next offseason or the offseason after. They want to keep the dead cap hit down if they let Wilson go. So that is probably making them hesitate because they know Wilson may not be aging gracefully. They know that Wilson may very well just not be that good in a couple years. And they also know that he's not very happy with the team right now, and the team is not very happy with him. People might want to move on in a year, and they want to make that as painless as possible. So I think you could make a very strong argument that Wilson is the guy who benefits the most from a Seahawks restructuring. Now, that doesn't mean I don't want to do it. I think it's worth taking the risk in order to try to win a Super Bowl this year, but I understand where Schneider and Carroll might be coming from if they end up saying, we don't feel like this is worth it, we want to keep our options with Wilson open next year and the year after. So the myth I'm trying to really dispel there is that if Wilson does not restructure, it's not because he's being greedy. Or if he is being greedy, he's doing a very bad job of it because, again, restructuring means he gets to make more money in future years in all likelihood, or at least he makes it more painful for the team to have to move on from him if they want to do that in the middle of his contract. And the fact that, as we already went over, the Seahawks could restructure him without even his approval or knowledge, it tells you that the block here is probably John Schneider, possibly a little bit of Pete Carroll in there as well. So those are the two main myths I want to dispel here. This is not Wilson being greedy. Now, if you want to get on him for not taking a reduced contract or something like that, okay, that was a conversation that we could have had 2 years ago when he signed the contract, but this is not greed on his part, I don't think. It just doesn't make any sense to me why it would be. So the third rumor, which ties into everything I just said, is that the Seahawks need to create tens of millions of dollars in salary cap room in order to have a good offseason and build a team that can contend in 2021. As of right now, if my calculations are correct, the Seahawks have about $18 million in cap room. Now, about $3.5 million of that is going to go to paying for Poona Ford, and maybe another $3.5 to $4 million is going to go to paying for their draft picks. That's going to get you down to about $10 million. A lot of people out there are saying, $10 million, that's going to be Corey Linsley by himself. We need to create a whole bunch of more cap room. We need to trade Lockett. We need to get rid of Wagner. We need to get rid of Reed. We need to restructure Wilson. We need to create, $60 million in cap room in order to get all these pieces we need. And I also want to push back on that myth. In the NFL, players rarely get all of their contract. They actually very often don't even get most of their contract because there's this thing teams do called backloading their contracts, where they will pay a player a huge amount of money in theory, but they will only get small slices of that money in the first year, maybe the second year. And then by the time we get to the back end of the contract where they put most of the money, the player gets cut or restructured or something else. And because most of their money wasn't guaranteed, they never see that money. So a great example of this would be J.J. Watt. If you take a look at J.J. Watt's contract that he just signed with the Arizona Cardinals. And this is a very odd and interesting contract, but while I don't want to say that this is a good idea for the Seahawks to do, this just goes to show you the different ways in which teams can creatively deal with salary cap issues. So J.J. Watt signed a 2-year, $28 million contract with the Cardinals in last week, I think. So that sounds like a lot of money. That is $14 million per year. And it's easy to say, wow, the Cardinals could really end up regretting this, and they may. But if you take a look at how they structured this contract, this first year, J.J. Watt's not even going to count $5 million against the cap. Not even $5 million. Most of his cap hit has been relegated to 2022, where he will be counting $16 million against the cap almost. And if you're wondering where the rest of that money went, this contract actually has a very odd thing that you don't see very often in it, where he has a guaranteed $7.2 million cap hit in 2023 that is already considered void because I guess there's some guarantee in there where they're going to release him and give him that money. I don't know exactly how stuff like that works, but the overall point I'm trying to make here is what sounds like an unfeasible and an awful contract that is just going to cripple you actually doesn't. It's barely anything in 2021. In 2022, it's a little bigger. This is not a very comfortable place to be for a 33-year-old defensive player. But you can see how the cap hit gets spread out across 3 years, despite it being only a 2-year contract. And this first year is actually pretty painless. I'm not saying the Seahawks should do this thing where they give a $7.2 million dead cap hit in 2023 by default. That's not great business. But what I am saying is that you can do similar things with contracts to guys like Corey Linsley. You could give him 3 years, $30 million, and he only counts for $4 million against the cap the first year. And then you deal with the problem a little later. You can restructure with him in a future year. You can cut him and only have to pay a couple million in dead money. You could do the same thing with Gerald Everett. You could give him a $6 million a year contract that only pays him $2 million the first year against the cap. You could go get Joe Thuney, give him $12 million a year, but the first year it only counts $4 or $5 million against the cap. These are the things that teams have to do all the time to get all the players they need to get under the cap. So to people out there who say we don't have enough cap room, we need to create all this cap room in order to do what we need to do, I would like to see us do some of those things. I would. Trading Lockett, I think, would be a good idea. Doing something with Jarran Reed would probably be a good idea. Maybe restructuring Wilson too, but everything has a price. And if you can get away without doing those things, then don't do them. Jarran Reed is a little overpaid. Jarran Reed is not a great player, but I would rather have him out there than Quentin Jefferson or, God forbid, DeMarcus Christmas. So yeah, that's what I wanted to get into here. Those are 3 myths that I think need to be dispelled among the Seahawks community so we can have a little bit more of a useful discussion around some of these points. Wilson is not refusing to take a restructuring. He can't. The team is, I think, very clearly hesitant about doing something like that because it means more to them than it actually does to Wilson. And you can make a little bit of cap room stretch far. With that, I'm going to get out of here. Peace out, Go Hawks. Might stream tonight, might not. I don't know. Either way, I will be posting a video tomorrow where I go over my final thoughts on this offseason and what I would like to see us do. But until then, peace out. Go Hawks.